Well, my name's John Cameron. I currently live in Anchorage, Alaska. The first time I came to Alaska was in early 1972. I had transitioned from the manufacturer to the distributor networks and was employed by Emerson, Detroit Diesel Allison. And they sent me on a field service call that had a unique problem with a tugboat operating out of Ketchikan. And that was my first foray into this part of the world. And kind of looked like that's a place I'd like to be. So it just, it grew from there. Well, actually, I didn't have anything to do with it. It was a situation where in the first endeavor to build the pipeline in 1968-69, they, of course, needed mobile power for the construction camps. And as such, at that time, Bechtel had reached out to Emerson. They had pretty much a worldwide reputation for providing that kind of power. And so the original power modules for the first endeavor were provided by Emerson, Detroit Diesel. And when it appeared that the permits were going to be released for real, I had been recently hired by Emerson, primarily for power design, a technical representative. And the fact that these units had sat for so long, from the first shutdown, the Bechtel folks, and rightfully so, requested that one of the engineering techs from the Emerson group go to Prudhoe Bay and get these units that had been left idle, not as in running, but no one performing any maintenance or wellness checks on them, to give them a once-over so they could get them started up and be ready for the second effort. And it was the units that provided the power for all the construction camps that existed at that time, and those were only areas that were developed in the 1968-69 endeavor. And so in January, I found myself in a Wien Air Alaska airline with John Coates. And the first camp that we stopped at was Tulik. And everyone knows that Alaska does not get a lot of snow in terms of inches, but they get horrendous snow drifts. And so it was hard to find the power plants. We had to look for the exhaust pipes sticking up through the snow and then dig down to get into the enclosures and try and get them started up and push the button, as it were. It was a challenge, but we succeeded. Originally, going south out of Prudhoe Bay, first you had the Franklin Bluff camp, and so that was functional, and there were people in there, and there were people on their way to occupy the Tulik camp, and that was one of the reasons that Mr. Coates and company was anxious to try and get at least those two up and operational. And after we had done that, I could never get any closer to home than Fairbanks after that happened. About the time I was ready to go back to Seattle, there was another need, another cycle where we had to repeat the process until we had everything up and running at the time. So my projected 2-week field trip turned into 5 years. Longest field service call on record. Yeah, and our contact, the person that we reported to at that time, was John Coates. He was the field construction manager, supervisor, and that was the front end of our negotiations for the TAPS 1018 contract that we had. And that was, I had a lot of help from the Bechtel people trying to orchestrate that, because that obviously was not my forte. I came out of a technical environment. And, but all of their attorneys and whatnot worked with me to make sure that I had crossed the T's and dotted the I's and understood all the affirmative action plans and the rules and whatnot set forth, through that requirement with the government. So I never got back to my apartment and my Corvette and my drag boats and stuff. We were, but the pump stations were not that far along in construction at that point in time. Most of it was just trying to get the haul road built. Mm-hmm. That was the main effort and where the focus lied. So as the work began to progress through Fluor, they had the contract management contract through Alyeska, and they were not included in our TAPS 1018 because that was totally negotiated through Bechtel and Emerson. And at that time, it didn't include the pump stations, which it was an oversight, but you would have to have been there to really understand the chaos. Mm-hmm. Fairbanks went from a sleepy little town of plus or minus 6,000 people to over 30,000 people in one summer. It not only challenged the service industry itself as a whole, but it was hard on the citizenry also. You had people sleeping in your backyards in their pup tents and everything. There was no infrastructure to support that kind of thing. It was interesting to be involved in it, but the important thing is, and to other contractors than ourselves, and if Bechtel hadn't been Bechtel, and a gentleman that Steve Bechtel Jr. had sent to kind of oversee the project, they brought him out of retirement. His name was Mel Geyer, and I'll think of his wife's name in a minute. Just a wonderful couple. But he was into his 70s, but he was a big project guy, and he was the one that oversaw all the other management within the Bechtel group that was there. Phenomenal people. But, they're the folks that worked on Hoover Dam and all over the world. They knew how to do it. They could think big, and they weren't afraid to, go out and do what was necessary. When you looked at the beginning of it, it looked like, oh my God, how can anybody even think that way, that large? We represented the Cummins Engine Company because they didn't have a facility. And one of the service engineers, and this draws back to where our training ground was at the Berkeley Garage in Butte, Montana. There was a Cummins service engineer that had to live there, just like the Detroit Diesel guy, the Caterpillar guy, the International Harvester guy. And so we had exposure to the competitors' products. In some cases, we knew more about them than they did about the product. And when John Coates found that out, they got with Cummins. Cummins did not want to put a branch in Fairbanks, and so we actually administered warranty for Cummins Engine Company. And here we are, the General Motors Detroit Diesel competitor, managing their warranty and repairs. So it was multifaceted, to say the least. probably the environmentalists. A lot of people don't realize this, but that haul road is in the World Book of what is it? That records all the
Guinness.
Guinness. Yeah, it's on at the time. It was on record as being the longest, most difficult haul road that was built in 9 months. So, but when the scrapers operating out of the camps in the north, coming out of the pits to bring the material out onto the tundra, when they dropped it, I mean, some of the engines had oil leaks, and young guys and women out there working for the government, running around with their little sample bag and a magnifying glass to see if they could find a drop of oil where the scrapers turned around and went back to get another load. And if that was the case, then all hell broke loose and take that piece of equipment out of service immediately. Well, at that point in time, I mean, it was critical that the haul road get built, number one. Secondly, the amount of oil leakage, if you will, was totally minuscule. I mean, you could scoop it up with a teaspoon and you would have 100% remediation, okay? But they just had to justify their existence and raise their hand, which they did. And then it became incumbent upon me to try and get that piece of equipment fixed, if you will, to a level that satisfied the young environmentalists out there. They had their nose in everything. And I'm not raining on the environment. I love it as much, maybe more than most people. But, there's common sense and then there's overreaction. It was just a thorn in the side, and if you'd taken one of those large pieces of equipment out of the service rota, it impeded progress like most people can't even imagine. So what's your purpose here? I mean, are you on the same team as the rest of us? In most cases, they were not. So that was one of the issues at the time. And it was within that time period when I had talked to Dale Emerson, the principal of Emerson, Detroit Diesel, and about opening a branch in Ketchikan, because we had a store in Anchorage, but we didn't have one in Ketchikan. And ironically enough, the first company and product that had any kind of a service outlet in the 68-69 endeavor was Emerson Detroit Diesel. There were people that were stationed up there living in the old Quonset huts back in the day when it was it took a lot of fortitude to put up with it. But people made a lot of money, and that was probably a good thing. Bechtel understood that. So that there was always a major fire going on all the time that I was there. I mean, if it wasn't trying to build the haul road and keep the equipment operating, trying to take care of the competitors' equipment along with it. Obviously, ours came first, but we weren't going to abandon the Alyeska and Bechtel effort. It was just, as an example, the haul trucks. They were international harvesters, had Cummins engines in them, and before they shut the first endeavor down, they had a problem with availability of air cleaners. And one thing that a lot of people don't think of and can't get their head around it, the time when the haul road was really dusty was in the dead of winter. And so they kept operating the trucks in the first endeavor without air cleaners for the engines, air intake system. So the term that they use is the engine is dusted out. Well, that meant that the dust had been ingested by the engine, and in a matter of hours, it would wear out the piston rings and the liners. So here they are. They didn't have any compression. They wouldn't even start. And we had a team of guys out of our group that, we went up there and started rebuilding all of that stuff in winter outside. 40, 50 below was probably the average. But, it were things like that you didn't anticipate kept cropping up. And it was all part of it, and I can understand it. Now that I'm a little older, well, wait a minute, I'm a whole lot older, a little wiser. But you had to know what you were doing, okay? And because Emerson had a large branch in Anchorage, it was easy for us to put our arms around it. We had the sway with a lot of the freight companies. More importantly, we also ran our own trucks up the haul road. They were straight frame Kenworth tractors that obviously had our power in them, and they just continually did the route from Seattle through Anchorage, Fairbanks, and then turn around and go back to Seattle. And when that truck was returning one way, another truck was coming towards us. And we had tremendous cooperation from the Detroit Diesel Allison division of General Motors. We were at the front of the line no matter what. And it was not uncommon to fly new engines for scrapers from Detroit to Fairbanks in Hercs, and sometimes 12 at a time. So you just had to know how to do it. It wasn't that it couldn't be done or people were not willing to do it. You just had to be somewhat analytical, look at the requirement. Over here's the solution. This is what it takes. And don't be afraid to execute it. Primarily fishing. And, early day construction. Mm-hmm. They were very large in the marine market. And power generation on an international level. We did a lot of amazing projects over the years. The Patriot missiles that the U.S. provided the Israelis. God, what year was that? It was in about the mid-'60s, as I recall. But we built the power for that stuff. So we had the field service engineers had the opportunity to pretty much travel the world, service the entire Pacific, Southeast Asia, Mediterranean, mega yachts at the time. They preferred the Detroit Power, the large stuff. As long as it had chrome valve covers, they were happy. But I've been fortunate. The people that I've met, and obviously John Coates being one of them, and his team, there were a lot of people that worked for John, and they were all knowledgeable. Not more than he was, but he was a hoot. I used to love listening to his construction stories with Morrison Knudsen when he was in foreign countries and things were not going well. Well, the apprenticeship. It's kind of a long story, but my sister and I were at Montana State in Bozeman at the same time. She's a year and a half older than I am, and she was a year ahead of me. She had used up her student loan money, and she was in her senior year, needed 2 more quarters to graduate, and things were kind of tough. we came from a single parent family. There was four of us. So I took the monies that I had so she could graduate, with the plan being that she would uh, go to work as soon as she got out of school and then help me finish. I was like, well, it was a kind of a messy deal between the School of Mines on a semester basis and the university system that was on a quarterly basis. So depending which way you were going, you either gained credits or you lost. So in that process, boy, she got through school and I went back to Butte and went to work for the Anaconda Company, and I was working repairing massive, large pumps underground in the mine, the high ore mine, and it was it wasn't a mine for mining minerals. It was a mine for pumping all the water from 8,000 feet to the surface, around 2 million gallons a day. It had some dangers associated with it, but it was just not a very suitable working environment. And a friend of mine that his dad worked for the Anaconda Copper Mining Company. He was the one that did all the hiring, as a matter of fact, and an opening for an apprenticeship came up at the Berkeley garage, and they asked me if I'd want to do that, and I said, absolutely. I'll be there, as soon as I can get out of this hole that I'm working in, and that's where it all started. And it was it was actually more difficult than going to a university. You had to have 160 hours of classroom instruction on your own time every 6 months. It wasn't just a 4-year apprenticeship when I started, it was a 5-year apprenticeship. And at the end of your 4th year, beginning of your 5th year, you were laid off. Now, where's the fairness in that, right? The purpose of it was they wanted you to go to work for another either engine overhaul, equipment rebuild, machine shop, whatever, and get more experience than what you had already been taught under their guidance. And like I said, it took more of an effort to get through that than get my education. But at the end of the day, that's what won out. Technical knowledge. And it's in today's world, you don't see comprehensive apprenticeship training programs. You don't see people encouraging it. And it's I guess I'm an example that it can, if you let it, really treat you well. You have to apply yourself. You can't be afraid of hard work. It's a good gig. So a lot of the people I was able to hire to come to Fairbanks and participate in the project had the same background and training that I did, and I think that was probably one of the things that made us stick out. Steve Bechtel Jr. even commented on how technically sound our service group was in an open forum. So if you can attain that, I think it's all right. I don't know of anything that has eclipsed it.
Right.
And I doubt there ever will be, especially, pardon me, in the time frame. People don't realize that a lot of times you just didn't sleep. From the time we opened the branch, I had 437 consecutive days without a day off. 2 Christmases came and went. But we contributed. We did our part. We were paid well. So. And only in the beginning, because the people were still regurgitating the environmental issues and everything that shut it down in late 1969 before they had the opportunity to start up and try and get the permits in 74. But they must have been promised, because Bechtel had contacted us, and I was in Tule Lake in early 1974. You know, the permits hadn't been made public. If they were taken care of behind closed doors, that'd be my only assumption, because there was too much money and effort going in to trying to, get this thing started up again. So that was probably the only doubt I had, but there was still so much going on. It all pointed in the right direction. So I hung in there. I did. There were projects, pardon me, the one that comes to mind more than anything are the hovercraft. In the first endeavor, a British company by the name of Mackley Ace, who was known for building hovercraft, they built the substructure for the hovercrafts, and there were two of them, and they had put the special skirts and everything on them. They weren't self-propelled. A lot of people think they just went back and forth across the Yukon. Well, not really. There were Skagit winches on both sides of the Yukon River and a cable, okay? And that's what pulled them both directions. And it was kind of a hoot to watch. I never thought about it. I didn't think we'd get down in the weeds here, but sometimes the cables would break. And so here were these barges, hovercraft barges, and the fans only lifted them. The Skagit winches pulled them back and forth across the Yukon. And in early spring, it was pretty dicey sometimes. They called them skirts on the side would get torn, and the massive amount of air be coming out of there, making water bubble and boil, and this thing's going down the river with all these trucks on it. They had chase tugs to go get them, but they were laying on the beach when I got there. They had never been, that I could tell, put in use. They didn't have any power units. They didn't have any fans. They just had the kind of the substructure of the hovercraft platform itself. It'd just be like a barge with skirts on it. Mm-hmm. Well, we had the power units built in Seattle, shipped to us. The fans came from Germany. KLM flew them direct into Fairbanks. So it wasn't on purpose, but we became the focal point. Not by raising our hand. It was just, this is what needs to be done to make these things functional. So we worked day and night, trying to finish building this unit out. The power units, there were 4 of them, 2 on each hovercraft. And then we had to go install them, and then the Mackley Ace people showed up, and because they were Brits in the Jones Act, they couldn't really do anything other than stand on the sidelines. And they had some kind of an agreement through Bell Worldwide to be able to tell us what to do, and made them functional, and they worked. And now, how valuable was that? Well, when things were in full swing and the haul road was open, if they were not functional, even if one of them would shut down, there'd be over 3 miles of freight trucks on the south side of the Yukon. Okay, now, no way to get fuel to them. There's no food. There's no bathrooms. And here they are. And so when they did shut down, it was that was all hands on deck, myself included. Just get it done, repaired as quickly as we could. But Gosh, I should be able to tell you that because we had a person on each hovercraft. Perchance the engines burped or controls failed or what have you, because of the criticality of all of it. And the Alyeska was willing to pay for that. They said, yeah, we just want one of your technicians on each one of those things. That would be 24/7, 365. And so, if you bring it up with John Coates, he could probably add a lot to it. But we were able to do that, and well, they I don't know if they would have finished the project. They would have, but I don't know how. Maybe defer everything until the bridge was complete. Mm-hmm. But boy, first couple of years at least. Never. I'd never heard of it, never read about it. People I talked to, same thing. I mean, it was massive, absolutely massive. And Detroit Diesel, the president of Detroit Diesel, he came to Fairbanks personally to bawl me out, dress me down, and build me up at the same time. They loved the business, but there was such a shortage of engines for the scrapers that I was using I'm kind of reluctant to. I had authorization. I had a phone number I could call. If in fact the project really needed something, the factory would figure out a way to do it. But when you order up 12 engines for the scrapers, front engines, 7123, 7030 is the model number, and you're going to fly them to Fairbanks, Alaska? Wait a minute. Euclid Terex is also a division of Detroit Diesel Allison. And they were building equipment to sell to other people, but they didn't have any engines. They didn't have any because I bought them. He wasn't happy. He was happy that Detroit was glowing. I mean, we had more engines on that project than all other manufacturers combined, and a little over 3,000 Allison transmissions. So how do you service a fleet of that size? It's difficult. And it tested the depth and breadth of the Emerson group. Mm-hmm. We had branches throughout Seattle, throughout the state of Washington, locations in the Pacific. And the only way we could even begin to keep up with it is the things that were absolute red-hot emergency. We would rebuild it in Fairbanks, and then the next tier down we would send to the branch in Anchorage, and the next tier down from that we sent to Seattle. Seattle would take it and parse it out to the different branches, and then gather it all back up and send it back to us. That was the only way we could support it, because it reached a point where little rope start light plants and differentials out of Mack trucks and everything else were showing up at our door. Well, we appreciate the business folks, but it was like trying to drink out of a fire hydrant. Yeah, because we had modules that had our power in them from Brown and Root, and so we had to have people on hand, just because of the module itself. At that time there wasn't a utility, if you will. That kind of grew over time, but they wanted to fire them up right away. Well, you've got to go through a whole startup procedure and qualification and on and on and on. So it's like doing we used to call them an EPQ inspection, which stood for an end product questionnaire. And if a new manufacturer or client was using the product, when it went into service, we had to be there. We had to work with their engineers in the design group to make sure that they had an adequate fuel system, that the air intake system was large enough to accommodate the requirement of the engine under a full load, and it just goes ad nauseum, ad nauseum. And so you have to fill all these pages out, and then that goes back to the factory. And then once they stamp it and say, okay, this thing is doing what it's supposed to do, and we're happy with the application that it's in, then they qualified for warranty. That brings up the Texoma drills, which John Coates could certainly speak to. But when the people that represented Texoma, their office in One and Only warehouse was directly across the street from us off of Cushman Road. Mm-hmm. And J.D. Doctor was the manager of it, and it was a division of Howard Hughes Corporation. And the unit had a wonderful drill, but they didn't have any, enough lighting, especially where we've got, the hours of darkness that we've got here under adverse conditions. And this little Winco generator couldn't support any more than what the lights that came from the factory, and they were asking me about it. I says, well, you don't have enough power. Well, what are we going to do? I said, well, you need a bigger generator. And I said, come on. I worked in an open pit mine, and they drill 24/7. They drill at night, and they don't have these little tiny headlights that you'd see on a golf cart or whatever. I said, I don't see how anybody can see, the chuck tender. I can't see how he can clean the hole out and what's going on. So for God's sake, get some lights, get some power. Let's start wrapping the hydraulic lines with heat trace. You're using these things when it's 60 below. So we fundamentally built a winterized package out in front of my office. And J.D. Doctor was there. I mean, he flew up with help, and so that we're standing in the back of these Texoma drills, and it's a nice house they've got going around the drill body itself. How are we going to get this stuff in there? I said, it's not a problem. So I sent one of the kids down to the hardware store to get a piano hinge for me, and we got the oxygen acetylene tank out, and I cut the slit across the back of their nice cabin on the drill, and we mounted the piano hinge, and then I just split it down the sides, and I says, there it is. We threw the little alternator that was in there, the package, just picked it up and pitched it out in the snow, and put in a unit that was 3 times larger, hooked it up, said, some of the lights had started to arrive. We mounted those on the drill mast and lit it up. I said, now go drill holes, guys. Your VSMs, that's what they were for. And yeah, one of the engineers that was there, he was upset, and to J.D. Doctor's everlasting credit, he says, I brought you up here to help, and it doesn't look like you're on board with what we're trying to get done here. He says, so why don't you just go back to Houston? Oh, yeah. The Inslee backhoes. And this is where, when they get into a competitive bidding requirement on equipment, the manufacturers always have to have options, because we don't all see the same thing through our eyes as someone else. And the Inslee backhoes had 871T Detroit Diesel Allison engines in the backhoes themselves. And the first thing that happened, had to send, and it was not that far out of Valdez, Delta Junction maybe. I've forgotten, but it's only been 2 years, whatever. So this particular new backhoe had a serious oil leak, and it was coming out of the front of the engine. Well, whoever the sales engineer was with Inslee should have had his fingers and toes cut off, because the shutter assembly on the radiator for winter operation was available. But because it was a bid environment, here's a little savings here, and we'll drop that off, and this and that. And well, by the time they got through with it and muscled their quote down to the point where Alyeska took that without all the options for cold weather. So what had happened was it was so cold that the front crankshaft seal on the engine itself, and then immediately you've got the radiator with no shutters. So inside that engine environment, it's generally not too bad if you can stop all the airflow. And you really don't need airflow at 50, 60 below zero to operate an engine. What you need is a constant temperature. Thermal shock can cause damage. That's a whole other conversation. But anyway, there were no shutters on it, and so our guys went in and pulled the dampener and everything off the front of it to get the seal out, and the seal came out. So they had the presence of mind somebody went and got a plastic bag. Now think about plastic when you're working outside at 50 plus below. But anyway, they got all the pieces, and it just looked like somebody had taken some black throat lozenges or candy or something and crushed it up. The seal just exploded. It just fractured and fell apart. Well, that's not the engine's fault. You're drafting this minus 50 plus 60 degree cold air across the front of the engine, so that seal on the outside is subjected to Arctic air. The inside of that same seal is subjected to the engine operating temperature. Doesn't work. It just solidified and broke. And then another one, and then another one. And John Coates will remember this one. I mean, I used to have to sit with him every Sunday morning at 6 o'clock and go over all the time cards from all the people and all the camps. If you have an opportunity to see him, you tell him I have not forgotten. But, we gave him warranty on the first one, which was probably not what we should have done, but we were one of the few companies that even provided warranty. The rest of the manufacturers knew that it's such an adverse operating environment that here, you do the best you can. But something happens, don't call us. Call John over at Emerson. Yeah. But I don't know. There's, at least 5 years of those stories, and it was a challenge, but there were a lot of companies that really stepped up and did a yeoman's job. I mean, really, put their back into it. Well, the letter that I gave you, there were people in Bechtel that were really interested in our group, and they had just started building Kuwait City. And so we were approached to submit a proposal to take a maintenance group and move to Kuwait. So they thought I'd be better served being in Seattle, I could still support the service managers and whatnot in Anchorage and Fairbanks, but it's working on another large project, and it was for Bechtel. So I worked on that for some time, and then one day the pipeline was done. I was transferred back to Anchorage for several years, and then they wanted to open another branch in southern Washington to better support the logging industry out on the Olympic Peninsula. And so then I was tasked with that. And then after that, I was moved back to Seattle, and I was the engineering manager and led the design teams on marine packages, power generation packages, Arctic packs that I eventually trademarked the expression, because they work when it's cold. But here we are. I'd ask him, why aren't you half finished with your education? And sometimes you want to quit because the people that I apprenticed under, and that's part of Butte's history and legacy. If people want to know more about it, they can read a book called The War of the Copper Kings. But it was settled by Central Europeans. And most of those people in the trades and the crafts were seconded out to XYZ furniture, house builder, whatever case may be, okay? At 12, 13 years old. Nothing was given them. They had to earn it. And by God, they hadn't forgotten. When it was my turn to go into the engine room, and I was assigned to a machinist. His name was Ray Rickard. And he even knew my older brother, but that didn't count. He didn't speak to me for 6 months. I'd stay after shift every day. I'd clean that lathe. It just shined. I mean, you couldn't find one metal chip, you couldn't find anything. I mean, it was better than when it came out of the package when it was new. 6 months. He never said a word to me. Finally, one morning I came in. I was always there early. And he walked up to me and tapped me on the shoulder. He never said good morning, goodbye, kiss my butt. I don't like you. You're doing great. Keep it. Nothing. He said, looks to me like you want to learn something. That's all he said. And that was a new day. And again, that was like drinking out of a fire hydrant. All the little things that they learned on the side. I mean, he shared everything with me. So, and at the time, it just, I didn't realize, I guess I didn't have a full appreciation for the value of that knowledge until the pipeline. Because if it was going to happen, it happened on the pipeline. And I'm sure my dear friend Mr. Coates would probably agree with that.